And kind of segueing into our next segment here, the Bengals apparently want Rex Burkhead back. And Rex Burkhead had a tremendous game against the Ravens. I think it was 27 carries, 122 yards, and 2 scores. Consistently running well, finding holes, creating holes in the offensive line. And it's causing a great debate amongst Bengals fans. You know, is he currently on the roster? Is he at least better than Jeremy Hill? Is the sample size too small? Whatever the case may be, Burkhead is now going to be an unrestricted free agent going into this offseason. The Bengals have made it clear they want to re-sign him. But, Scott, there's a lot of issues at play here. Number one, what's Burkhead going to ask? I mean, his statistics are low, but there appears to be some pretty high upside. Number two, if they sign him back, where is he going to fall on the depth chart? And number three, if he does supplant someone, who is that going to be?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that can't be overlooked is Jeremy Hill's had some good games this year. I think he had 3 or 4 really big games, but they were against some of the worst defenses in the NFL. He gouged the Browns twice. I think one time he had, 9 carries for 160 yards, something absurd like that.
Yeah.
But they were one of the worst defenses in the NFL. The Broncos, for as good as their defense was, it wasn't a good run defense. I think he had 97 yards against them. He really hadn't torched anyone good. Burkhead comes out. Ravens are a top 5 unit as far as yards per attempt, touchdowns, and rushing yards.
Yep.
He burns them 119 yards and 2 touchdowns. And it's not like he had one big 80-yard gain, but it was this constant 5 yards here, 10 yards there, 7 yards here, make a guy miss. Yeah, he looked like a very good, shifty, running back, some power. He seemed to run with a lot of purpose. Like that touchdown run where he had that big dive and they had to review it. And yeah, you watch him run, it's like, wow, yeah, this is pretty awesome. And then you watch someone like Hill. Okay, you get a yard here, get stuff there. Okay, we put him in near the goal line. Eventually gets in. He does his choreographed dance, goes back to the sideline. And so I think a lot of fans rightfully are very excited about Burkhead because there's a lot to like from what we've seen. And it makes sense the team would want to sign a guy like that. He'd obviously be a good guy to have on special teams and in the roster. The problem I think they run into is he kind of has I think the team probably sees him in the same role as Giovanni Bernard, as kind of that shifty guy, the smaller guy, especially when they have Hill. For some reason, before Hill was there, Bernard had no problem getting in the end zone. But once Hill showed up, like, okay, we're not going to use anyone small for that. And I think they would do the same thing with Burkhead. I can't see them having both Bernard and Burkhead when the team probably sees them in that same, they're kind of a split guy, smaller guy. And he doesn't do as much as Giovanni does as far as like pass protection or have the same level of receiving out of the backfield. So that kind of goes against them. They just signed Gio to that big contract last year. So Gio's not going anywhere. I think a lot of people would like to see him over Hill. And if you look at Hill, he's been lackluster for two and a half of the last 3 seasons. He's done nothing, including the last 2 years. And I could see after his rookie year, if they did not re-sign Hill, I don't think they would cut Hill. So it kind of makes you wonder, well, what price would they pay him? I think they'd probably offer Burkhead something reasonable. But if I were to just throw a random guess out there, I'm going to say that Burkhead probably played himself out of orange and black with the rate. Because I think that one game he probably played so well that I think someone out there who needs a running back is going to look at that game and say, wow, this is a guy we need to throw too much money at and bring in to our team.
I think it was a comment on either Cincy Jungle or somewhere on Twitter I read after Burkhead's game, someone had mentioned the fact, and I kind of laugh a little bit, but it seems to be very true, is this seems to be a classic Bill Belichick type of pickup in free agency. A guy who can run, a guy who can catch, a guy who just does things the right way. And probably, one of those hard workers. And, if you've seen Bill Belichick and his running backs, he values a handful of traits out of them. Usually they're They're pretty versatile, with the exception of LeGarrette Blount. But I kind of laughed. I'm like, oh boy, if that happens, and there's a handful of teams that seem to exchange players when free agency hits, and that the Patriots and Bengals are one of them. But you
look at teams that could use a running back; they're kind of hard up for one. I mean, there's definitely teams that the Giants were offense that they definitely lacked a running back. Green Bay seems to have had running back issues. Minnesota's probably going to lose Adrian Peterson. The Colts aren't going to have Frank Gore forever. There's definitely teams out there that I think would be looking for a starter. And if you're Burkhead, do you want to sign on with even the Bengals throw some money at you to be a third stringer, or a guy who is in a three-way committee, or do you want a chance to start? So I just think as well as he played, I think someone's going to look at him and say, hey, we're going to offer you $5, $6, $7 million a year. And I don't see the Bengals matching that or the opportunity he would get elsewhere.
Yeah, and I think that's the Marvin Jones, Mohamed Sanu thing that happened this last year. So I'm gonna ask you a question in just a second here, Scott. But you look at it and you go, okay, yeah, I think most fans would say, yeah, bring Burkhead back. But I think there's a contingency that believes that maybe the Bengals either will lowball him, or, like you said, he might look for a more heavy workload and more money elsewhere. So I seem to support Jeremy Hill a little bit more than many other fans seem to. I look at 2016, it wasn't spectacular. I agree with you that there were a lot of dry spells, but he finds the end zone, number one. And number two, the team and fans asked him to do two things in 2016 to improve upon from 2015. That number one was holding on to the football, which that definitely happened. He didn't fumble once, or he at least didn't lose any fumbles this year. But I think maybe he fumbled one time. But I don't even really recall that he fumbled. And he did increase his yards per carry. Granted, it was only by 0.2 of a yard, but he went from 3.6 to 3.8, and he was surging towards a 1,000-yard season and close to a 10-touchdown season. So, there's some positives there, but you look at it and you go, this team is lacking some explosiveness. Now, here's the scenario I want to throw out to you, Scott. Say Rex Burkhead leaves. You got a lot of fans souring on Jeremy Hill, and you've got Giovanni Bernard coming off of knee surgery after signing a big contract. And then you've got Cedric Pierman is also a free agent. If you're the Bengals, do you look at certain teams a la the Dallas Cowboys? I think we had a similar discussion a few episodes ago with Leonard Fournette specifically. But if you're the Bengals, do you, whether it's Leonard Fournette, if it falls to him, whether it's a versatile guy like Dalvin Cook from Florida State, if he's there, or if a guy like that happens to kind of slide a little bit, do you move back into the first round? Is running back all of a sudden a pressing need given Burkhead possibly leaving, Hill, not being the same guy since 2014, and Bernard coming off of some major surgery?
I am a huge believer that at the NFL level, running back is more a function of offensive line and offensive system. That you look at some of the running backs who've been successful, guys like Thomas Rawls, Fred Jackson, like these people who just kind of come out of nowhere. Obviously, Burkhead in his one-game sample. But you don't have to be a high pick to be very good. You just have to be, because there's so many good running backs in the college level who make it to the NFL. You get in the right system, you get the right offensive line. You could be a old, banged up, busted up veteran. You put them on the right team, and they're going to be, they can be a very good running back. You look at Rudy Johnson. He couldn't catch the ball, wasn't very shifty, wasn't very fast. He was a decent power back, had a great line in front of him, and set all sorts of records as far as rushing yards per game, and was consistently a dozen touchdowns for like 3-4 straight years. You just imagine if you had Corey Dillon behind that line, he could have been maybe a 2,000-yard running back. So to me, it's much more the line than the player. I'd say if let's say Burkhead signs elsewhere, Hill goes, I might be in the minority, but I'd be perfectly content saying, okay, We have Trey Carson. We grab someone like a James Wilder type of UDF, drafted free agent, and you just kind of go from there and see what you have, because it's a quarterback league, and you focus on the lineman, you get the lineman fixed, and the running game kind of falls in place.
I'm not laughing at you. I mean, you bring up good points, and I wanted to refute a lot of them. I mean, but you bring up good points. I don't know. I think this offense needs some sizzle, and that I'm not saying running back top 10 necessarily, but I think this team. We've talked about speed, we've talked about playmakers, and you mentioned these teams that don't really value running backs that highly. You talk about the Patriots, you talk about the Packers. Look who their quarterbacks are. And that's not a knock on Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton, some people feel is a top 10, some people feel is a top 15 quarterback, whatever. He's still not that, and I hate to throw this word out because it just bugs the heck out of me, but he's not that elite guy. And he's always been a guy that does need some talent around him. Now, he's stepped up his play over the past couple of years, but I do agree with you on the offensive line. The problem is then we go back to the stubbornness thing we were talking about. The Bengals set in their ways with Russell Bodine up in the middle of that line. Clint Bowling, who had an up and down year. What do they do with the two young tackles, Jake Fisher and Cedric Abwehi? And what do they do with Kevin Zeitler? And if they think, hey, we've done enough already, we already got high picks here, and we'll re-sign Zeitler. That means they're going to look elsewhere in the draft. And I don't know. If Burkhead leaves and Hill doesn't seem to be the same guy he was from a couple years ago, and then you've got your most exciting back, Bernard, coming off knee surgery, it's kind of a tough call to make. And again, I'm not necessarily condoning a top 10 pick at running back, because I think there are other pressing needs that you can, you build your team a lot of times outward in. But I don't know.
As far as Burkhead, I'm going to throw out a very strange name and say the whole Burkhead thing reminds me a lot of Anthony Collins.
Okay.
And he was a Bengals backup, kind of like Burkhead. Neither one ever really got a chance to play. They never really did anything. Finally, in their last season, their contract, because of injuries, Anthony Collins got on the field, Burkhead got on the field. Collins, all of a sudden, everyone's like, because if you remember, Collins was a guy they kept on the bench over Dennis Rowland, who continually played at a level that made Cedric Abwehi look pretty decent. Anyway, Collins finally got in there, got to play some tackle, and actually had some pretty good games. He shut down some elite pass rushers, some sack artists, kind of held them in check. And then on a very small sample size against some decent teams, he got signed to a big contract down in Tampa Bay. And I don't even think he survived that first year before they let him go. Burkhead seems to be in that same situation. He's a guy who, never really got a chance, been a backup a long time. Okay, he's finally got one game against a good defense, had a very good game, arguably the best one by a Bengals running back this year. Someone's going to look at that, throw too much money at him, and who knows if he'll flop like Collins or, if he'll be successful. But there's just a lot of similarity I see that it just kind of makes me it's hard to see Burkhead and not think of the same situation that we went through with Collins about 4 years ago.
It's good analogy. Collins also was, I think, for a good amount of time, and I think why Bengals fans valued him. He filled in a lot for Andre Smith, because Andre Smith had quite a few injuries early on in his career, and I think that's where a lot of Bengals fans, including myself, found him very valuable. And he, sometimes they'd try him at guard, but that didn't really work out. And he also, in the rare occasion Whitworth would miss a game, he would fill in at left tackle too. So he was just a versatile, athletic guy that fit into the Bengals system well. But you're right. I think he went to Tampa Bay along with Michael Johnson. It was that same year. Yep. They spent a ton of money on both guys, and it just didn't work out for him. So that tends to happen. But, if they go to the right team, it might be something that Burkhead would shine in. But, the Bengals will be looking at defensive end, linebacker, wide receiver, maybe even tight end. in the draft and in free agency. But running back is an interesting position for them to be keeping an eye on because of just, again, I think this is an off season where the Bengals want to breed a lot of competition at spots. They don't. If I'm on that staff, I don't want to have a lot of players feel safe with their starting status following a 6-win season. I mean, I think everybody's disappointed in that. And unfortunately, Marvin Lewis is a guy that likes to continue to play the same guys, likes that continuity, likes the veteran steadiness. But, I think after a very disappointing season, they need to shake things up.